Hey, what you reading for?
Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk about books, literary, horror classics, and contemporary, and where I am also obsessed with lists. I love making lists, I love looking at other people's lists, which is what I'm going to do in today's video. The 15 must-read horror books released in 2023. Now this list was put out by BookBub, which is a platform that searches for discount ebooks. So for example, I have subscribed to their mailing list, so every day I get these email notifications with 5 or 6 titles of ebooks that are usually $1.99 or $2.99 each. Generally new releases, but sometimes some older books as well. I've never used this service before, but I've only discovered it recently. I'll leave a link in the description box below. And the reason why I chose this topic is I'm currently in the middle of a 10-part video retrospective of horror from the 1980s. And prior to that, I did a 4-part video series of horror from the 1970s. So I have been spending the last few months reading a lot of horror from previous generations from the last century, and I have been neglecting my current reads. In fact, I've only read one horror book released in 2023, and that was Catriona Ward's The Sundial. No, Catriona Ward's Looking Glass Sound, which I really liked. Which I loved actually. But I need to stay current. I need to stay up to date. So I have to go through these lists and find and fill up my TBR. Right now, I looked at several lists, and invariably, the list will have an author I really don't like on it, or they'll have a book that is clearly not a horror book, which kind of invalidates or discredits the list. But this list by BookBub does not have any of those unsavory elements. However, it does have a few other triggers. Now, I am only going to go off on 2 rants in this video, and I'll keep them short. Short-ish. If you are new to this channel, thank you for stopping by. I do hope you enjoy the content, and I do hope that you consider subscribing. I appreciate the support. Now I will hand things over to the great American composer John Adams for a short intro sequence, and I will see you on the other side to talk books. Starting off the list, we have Holly by Stephen King. Now, I have heard good things about this book. I've also heard that Stephen King does not shy away from leaning into his political opinions and giving them freely, which is kind of a turnoff for me. I've also heard that it's more of a mystery and not a horror. I am looking for horror right now. My last Stephen King experience was back in September. I read 11/22/63, the time travel drama about a man who goes back and tries to stop the Kennedy assassination. It's 1,000 pages long. I thought it was 600 pages too long, perhaps. I didn't like it as much as everyone else seemed to. But I get why people liked it. It didn't work on me. There's a lot of 60s nostalgia that just didn't interest me, and it was overly long and kind of preachy at times. So I'm not really eager to read another Stephen King, I will eventually, of course, but not Holly. So I'm gonna pass on this one for now. Moving on, The Changing Man by Tomi Oyemakinde. Ife Adebola is a gifted student who finds herself one of the very few black faces at the elite Nithercott school. So, a student, I have nothing against students. It's just that this probably might be a YA book because it has a young protagonist. I prefer older protagonists. I prefer a protagonist with more life experience. I just find them more interesting, if I'm being honest. Of course, there are many great books with young protagonists too, but it is a bit of a red flag. Once in those unfriendly academic halls, she hears the urban legend of the Changing Man, a supernatural entity that preys on the lonely, abducting them and then returning them devoid of all personality and life. When one of the few other black students disappears and returns altered, Ife worries that the Changing Man might be more than a legend and forms desperate alliances with other isolated students to investigate, leading to a horrifying confrontation. So this is Tomi Oyemakinde's first novel, although on Goodreads it does have it listed as a YA book, and it also has a very low Goodreads rating of 3.47 stars. So I am not interested in YA, so I'm going to pass. Moving on, Knock Knock Open Wide by Neil Sharpson. Now this is Neil Sharpson's second book, and both books, his first one and this one, have very high ratings on Goodreads, so that intrigues me. It's not everything, but it does catch my attention, if you will. Aisling is a young drama student, again with the young people, embarking on the first great love affair of her life, but she's haunted by her family's tragic past. Her mother was traumatized by her discovery of a brutalized corpse 25 years before, and her father died by suicide a decade later. But it's the disappearance of her twin sister that truly haunts her. Aisling is convinced that an old children's TV show featuring a menacing goat puppet is somehow involved in all the tragedy, but everyone she talks to thinks she has it wrong. Slowly, Aisling realizes the goat is far more than a puppet, and she must face a terrifying horror as she seeks the truth. So this sounds very tropey, getting serious tropey vibes, although I do like the idea of a goat puppet. That sounds pretty cool. It does seem young, right? We have a young protagonist and we have a children's television show. This is listed on Goodreads as adult, although I've been fooled by that before. Listed as adult queer fiction. The blurb doesn't really intrigue me, to be honest with you, but it has been getting a buzz. So this book is not going to make it onto my TBR now, but it is on my radar. Moving on. Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. Okay, now I am looking for serious horror. Chuck Tingle this is his first horror novel. He is a writer of queer erotica. He has given us books such as Trans Wizard Harriet Porber and the Bad Boy Parasaurolophus. Let me try that again. Parasaurolophus. He's also given us Pounded in the Butt by My Own Butt and Pounded by the Pound, Turned Gay by the Socioeconomic Implications of Britain Leaving the European Union. Now, I am looking for serious horror. I don't think I'm going to get serious horror from the author of Pounded in the Butt by My Own Butt. I could be wrong. Let's have a look at the synopsis anyway. Camp Damascus. In this book that N.K. Jemisin calls a genuinely terrifying nightmare, 20-year-old high school senior, again with the young people, Rose is a true believer in her Christian sex theology and gay conversion therapy program, Camp Damascus. But when she's bombarded by demonic apparitions and haunted by memories of her past, she begins to question what she's been taught and takes on a mission of revenge. T. Kingfisher calls the read a joyful, furious romp through dark places. So I'm going to pass on this just because I don't think from this author I'm going to get a work that a serious work, and I'm in the mood for something serious. But it does intrigue me, the premise, the idea of the conversion therapy. Earlier this year, I wrote a manuscript about the horrors of conversion therapy. It was my attempt at queer erotica, coincidentally enough, and it was not a successful attempt. It was not a good manuscript. I wrote one draft of it and then crumpled it up and threw it in the proverbial waste bin. So I am kind of intrigued to see what this writer, who's more experienced with queer erotica, what he did with that premise. So it is on my radar, but right now I want something serious. I don't think I'm going to get that from Chuck Tingle, so I'll pass for the moment. Moving on. Vampires of el Norte by Isabel Cañas. I've heard of this book. I've heard good things about this book. I've also heard that it's YA, so I'm going to pass. Moving on, The Night House by Joe Nesbo. Joe Nesbo is super famous, right? Norwegian writer. He had a big hit with The Snowman, which was on my TBR for ages and ages and ages. Finally, I just took it off. I didn't read it. I figured if it's been on there for like 4 years and I haven't read it yet, I'll never read it. But here he comes out with a horror book. Let's see what this is about, huh? Richard Eloved was a bully who tormented his classmates in the small town of Ballantine. When 2 of his victims vanished during terrifying supernatural events, the police suspect Richard, and he's sent off to juvenile correctional facility. 15 years later, Richard, now the author of a book about those otherworldly occurrences, arrives at his school reunion. He apologizes to his classmates for his bullying ways, but they insist none of it ever happened. Now, I had a look at Goodreads, and the reviews it does not have a very high rating on it. And the reviews complained that it was too weird and too far out. Now, weird and far out, that appeals to me. But the 2 aspect, that appeals to me a lot less. Now, if you've been following this channel, you'll know that if I have a bad experience with an author, it's highly unlikely that I will give that author a second chance. So I've never read Joe Nesbo before. I don't think that this is the book to start with, though. I think that I should start with a more celebrated book, probably Snowman. So I'm not going to put this on my TBR. Although it is horror, and it's weird and far out, it's on my radar, let's say. Not on my TBR, though. Moving on. Dead 11 by Jimmy Juliano. When grieving mother Willow discovers the words Clifford Island written under her recently deceased son's toy chest, she travels there and vanishes. Her brother Harper launches a desperate search to find her, but Clifford Island is remote and isolated, not to mention strange. All right, so I'm going to pause here. This is going to be a bit weird, but this, the blurb is not really written very well, is it? If a blurb is not written well, it is a red flag for me. I understand that all authors are different. When my publisher sends out a blurb like this to a publication such as this one, it is always something that I have written. There is someone in the publishing house who writes promotional material like this, and she has offered to do it and send it to me to have them check. I prefer to do it myself. And it has been that way with other publishing houses as well. And I assume that that is the way with all writers. I assume that either they write it themselves or it's written by someone in-house and then they okay it. So if the blurb is questionable or it's bad, it's not a deal breaker, but it is a red flag. So here we have, when grieving mother Willow, no comma, discovers the words, that's fine. But in the very next sentence, her brother, comma, Harper, comma. So the punctuation is, in the first two sentences, is inconsistent. And I know that BookBub did not write these blurbs. They're not going to spend the time to write 15 different blurbs. They're just going to take whatever the publisher gives them. Maybe the publisher gave them something that was too long for their needs, so they might have cut it. Maybe. But most likely they just print exactly what the publisher gives them. So this is a red flag that this blurb is just poorly written. But let's read on, yeah? Everyone drives old model cars, and the events of 1994 seem to occupy an unnatural amount of everyone's attention. As Harper and Willow's stories, okay, so that should be Harper apostrophe S, Harper's and Willow's stories, twist around those of Lily, a teenage resident of Clifford, the island's frightening secrets are slowly doled out, leading to a shocking series of revelations. Okay, here we have 90s nostalgia. Okay, that's fine. I'm not opposed to nostalgia, 90s nostalgia. I did take a peek at Goodreads, and the reviews were quite favorable, but they do say that it's more of a mystery than a horror. This is Jimmy Juliano's first book. And I'm going to pass on it. I'm going to pass on it just because the blurb is pretty sloppy. Which is probably not fair. Who knows? Maybe Book Blurb did some shady editing to it. I don't think so, though. So I'm going to pass on it anyway, because it's more of a mystery, and I'm looking for horror. Moving on. A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. Now, I have heard a lot about this book. I have heard a lot of good things about this book. T. Kingfisher is the pseudonym for Ursula Vernon, who writes children's books and comics. But she uses this pseudonym T. Kingfisher when she writes for adults. I've never read any of her children's books. I've never read any of her adult books either. But this book has been getting a good buzz, and she is quite a successful author. So I'm intrigued. Let's see what the blurb says. When a professional setback leaves Sam Montgomery with some time on her hands, she drives to her long-dead grandmother's house to spend quality time with her mother. So immediately we have a professional setback. So this is a protagonist with some life experience. That's nice. Long-dead grandmother's house. Okay. But her mother is acting strangely, don't they always? Yeah. And Sam begins to experience disturbing episodes of sleep paralysis. She starts researching her family's history, seeking medical clues, but instead finds a lurking terror attached to her family, an entity that seems determined to destroy Sam, her mother, and several other people in town. Things become terrifyingly weird in short order as Sam is forced to face the reality of her family and her relationship to it. So I don't love the idea of a protagonist doing research. That doesn't particularly appeal to me. I did have a look at the reviews, and they all remarked on the style of the narration, style of the narrator. It's quite comical or dry and sarcastic, which is kind of hit or miss for me. One reviewer mentioned that it was reminiscent of a stand-up comedy routine, which has me very nervous. I used to host stand-up comedy open mics, and I have seen more than my fair share of cringy stand-up, so I'm kind of averse to that medium a bit now. But I have heard good things about this book, and it's only 250 pages. It's worth a risk, right? There it is. I'm putting it on my TBR. I should probably read T. Kingfisher anyway. And so this sounds like a good book to start with. Moving on. Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. Stephen Graham Jones is a very popular, very successful horror writer. He had success with Mongrels and The Only Good Indians and My Heart is a Chainsaw. Now, I read The Only Good Indians, and I didn't really like it, actually. I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it. So I'm not super eager to read another book by Stephen Graham Jones. I'm just thinking that he's probably not the writer for me. He probably writes for a much younger reader. In fact, Don't Fear the Reaper is the second installment of the Indian Lake trilogy, which started with My Heart is a Chainsaw. And My Heart is a Chainsaw I have not read, but I've heard it's narrated by a giggling teenager. And she's very referential, constantly referencing horror books and horror tropes, horror movies and things like that. So I'm getting the vibe that this is probably for a younger reader, and I probably should read the first installment of the trilogy before I read this one. And I have no interest in reading My Heart is a Chainsaw. So this is going to be a pass. I don't think I'm the reader for this trilogy. She is a Haunting by Trang Tran. 17-year-old, what's with the teenagers? 17-year-old Jade Nguyen travels to Vietnam to spend time with her estranged father in exchange for college tuition money. As she works to help him open a bed and breakfast in his French colonial house, she is plagued by strange dreams and unsettling happenings. Real-life horror blends with the supernatural, and this book, Publishers Weekly calls an eerie tale overflowing with deeply unsettling atmosphere. Okay, I am intrigued by reading a book set in Vietnam. I think it's been a long time since I've taken a literary journey to that country. I am less intrigued by a 17-year-old protagonist. I had a look at Goodreads, and it says that it is YA and perfect for fans of Mexican Gothic. I was not a fan of Mexican Gothic, and I'm not interested in YA, so I'm moving on. Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. A great title, by the way, I think. I have heard good things about this book. Let's have a look at this synopsis. 3 years ago, Alice visited a haunted house with her friends Hannah and Isla. Hannah never escaped, and ever since, Alice, a trans woman, has been haunted by a violent evil force that sometimes manifests in the form of a racist singer from the past. When Isla, who became transphobic after their experience, contacts Alice for the first time in years to suggest they return to the house to deal with their trauma, Alice reluctantly agrees, but the two estranged friends aren't prepared for what they find there or what it will do to them. Okay, interesting premise in parts. We have a trans woman, which I can't recall off the top of my head last time I read a story with a character or a protagonist that was a trans woman. So that kind of appeals to me. However, I did have a peek at the reviews at Goodreads, and they were quite good, except there were many red flags. I saw phrases such as a scathing look at fascism or frequent references to culture wars and a lot of culture war talking points held together by some mostly shallow riffing off of Shirley Jackson, Daphne du Maurier, Angela Carter, and Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Cancellation culture is referenced. Culture wars is referenced in many of the reviews. This sounds like it's an essay disguised as a story, or a story crammed with essays. I don't want to read an essay, and an essay disguised as a story isn't going to cut it. And I don't want like social commentary coming from the author. I'm happy if it comes from the story or from the characters, but I get the sense that this is coming from the author. And when the author inserts themselves into the story, they are always doing so at the detriment to the story. And we're seeing a lot of that these days. And I'm getting the sense from these reviews that that is what is happening here. So this book is on my radar because I have heard good things about it. But the reviews I perused on Goodreads kind of turned me off of it. So we'll see. It's on my radar, but it's not on my TBR. Moving on. Loteria by Cynthia Pelayo. This book is a re-release. It was originally released in 2012. So this is not a new release. It should not be on the list. So I will pass. Moving on. The Center, a novel by Aisha Manazir Siddiqui. Anissa Elahi has a talent for languages, but she's bored to tears subtitling foreign films and yearns for something more. When she meets Adam, a polyglot who can effortlessly speak a dozen languages, she falls in love, moves in, and starts teaching him her native Urdu, which he utterly fails to pick up. Adam finally admits he gained his languages by paying a strange school called The Center $20,000 a pop to undergo its mysterious process. Desperate to elevate her career, Anissa heads for the center, but it isn't long before she's concerned about the school's methods and the effect they're having on her. Okay. Well, it's a unique premise, which is nice. I wonder if in reading this book I'll learn some Urdu. Right? She's from Pakistan, the character's from Pakistan, and she's teaching her boyfriend Urdu, so maybe we'll pick up on some Urdu vocabulary. That would be nice. That would be a good selling point for this book. However, I did have a look at Goodreads, and Goodreads calls it a darkly comic, boundary-pushing debut following an adrift Pakistani translator in London who attends a mysterious language school. Okay, but similar to the last book, a lot of reviews were complaining of the preaching or the social commentary. I got sentences such as, the book weaved in critiques of our Eurocentric culture with a swipe at classism. It's a book interested in translation, misogyny, colonization, class privilege, and cultural appropriation. The commentary about Pakistani identity, colonialism, feminism, and all the social commentary. These are phrases that are coming up in a lot of reviews, and I don't want that in my books. I want story. I want story. I don't want culture war critiques of Eurocentric culture. No. Just not in the mood for that. But I would like to learn a little bit of Urdu. So I'm going to pass on this book. Yeah, I'll pass. Moving on. I Feed Her to the Beast and the Beast is Me by Jamison Shea. All right, cool looking cover. Although the cover does kind of look YA-ish, doesn't it? Laure Mesny wants nothing more than to dance for the Paris Ballet. Okay, there is no such company called the Paris Ballet. There's the Paris Opera Ballet, but there's not the Paris Ballet. And so that leads me to one of two conclusions. Either the writer wants to set this book in a fictional world where a company called the Paris Ballet exists, or she simply just didn't do her research. I don't know which is more likely. My guess, based on other things I know about this book, my guess is that it's the latter, but I don't know. In either case, it's kind of a turnoff. I want my horror to be grounded in this world, grounded in reality. Even if supernatural elements are going to be introduced later, I would much prefer that it be the Paris Opera Ballet and that it be a real thing. But it's not. Moving on. But as the lone black dancer, she encounters a cold, bullying troupe in addition to endless criticism, brutal physical strain, and oppressive mental and emotional abuse, all in the service of perfection. I have to stop here. I'm going to go off on a little rant here, okay? We have a story here about a ballet dancer, a black ballet dancer, the lone black ballet dancer of this mythical Paris ballet. And she encounters bullies and criticism and brutal physical strain and oppressive mental abuse, emotional abuse in the ballet company, right? Now, I understand that everybody's experiences are different, are unique. I can't speak for everyone or for everyone's experience. I've never worked for the Paris Ballet. I've never worked for the Paris Opera Ballet. I have worked for other ballet troupes in Paris. And in that time, I did get to meet many, many people, many ballerinas, many ballet dancers, some from the Paris Opera Ballet. Without exception, they were all open-minded, creative, generous, kind people. All of them. In my limited exchanges, interactions with them. I find it very hard to believe. I find it, completely unrealistic that a black dancer would face bullying and emotional and abuse at a ballet troupe in Paris. I find that very hard to believe. Could be that my limited experience with ballet in Paris is abnormal. It's not the norm. I don't think that is likely. I think what is more likely is that this story is based on the world of ballet as it has been presented to this writer through cinema, through movies such as Black Swan or Suspiria, excuse me. I remember seeing Black Swan when it came out, because I was a huge fan of the director, and I didn't take too kindly to the portrayal of ballet dancers in that movie. It was an interesting story, but just kind of unrealistic in the way that these ballet dancers are great people. They're kind, generous, open-minded, creative people. It's just something about that art form. You think about it, you are training to do beautiful dance, and you have to, in order to do this, you have to be very comfortable with your body and comfortable with expressing yourself through your body, through your movements. And there's something about that artwork, that art, that creates or attracts and probably nurtures just a kindness and empathy. This is why whenever I meet ballet dancers, they're always fantastic people. So I think that this negative portrayal of ballet dancers, I'm not taking kindly to it. This channel is very pro-ballet. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This channel is pro-ballet. And I don't take kindly to ballet dancers being portrayed in a negative way. I didn't like Black Swan for that reason either. And I'm probably not going to like this book for the same reason. I do remember, I am willing to suspend disbelief if the execution is there and if there's other interesting things going on. I remember maybe 10 years ago, there was a movie called Whiplash, which was basically this kind of a sports formula, underdog sports formula, but it was set in a jazz school in New York City where there was competition, and they were and they were trying to enter a contest to get a seat I don't in an orchestra or something ridiculous. The setting and the way the characters behaved was completely unrealistic for this world of music school. I went to music school, not in New York City, but also that's just not the way creative people, especially in the jazz world, behave. So it was wildly unrealistic, but the acting was really good and the music was really good. And some of the scenes and the exchanges were done very well. So I was happy to suspend my disbelief for that movie. I did roll my eyes quite often. But I am less willing to do so when it comes to ballet. All right, I'm sick of the way the ballet dancers are being portrayed in cinema, and I don't appreciate it happening in books either. So there it is. I'm going to pass on this book. I think it's YA anyway. So rant over, moving on. Nails and Eyes by Kaori Fujino, who is not Brazilian. I don't know why I pronounced it that way. This is a novella that is paired with a few short stories. I'm looking for a novel, so we're going to pass. And that is the end of the list. Well, that just flew by. Do you have any experience with any of these books or any of these authors? Please let me know. Perhaps my assumptions are wildly inaccurate. Wouldn't be the first time. And I need to put more 2023 horror books on my TBR. I have only one, which is A House of Good Bones, right? It's not enough. And if you've made it this far into the video and you're not a subscriber, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I don't rant about ballet in every video, just so you know. And I do look forward to hearing your reactions and hearing your feedback. And thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next video.